to listen to each other, we are willing to be changed. I'd like to call on back moderator for the next forum, and of course he's been here the past days. Please welcome back the man who wanted to be part of this panel, right? The feminine side of you wanted to be there, not so much to argue your case, but to support them. Please welcome back Mike Toledo.
If we could please settle down, please, so we can continue with our program. We can take the photos later on. If we could please settle down, please. Thank you very much, Anthony. Let's give Anthony another warm round of applause, please. Although he belongs to a competitor channel, CNN Philippines, I am willing to endorse his program in CNN Philippines called The Boardroom. Watch it, because it's a very good program indeed. Well, you've heard those very powerful women. And indeed, as Anthony said, there is indeed change going on in ASEAN as far as women is concerned. And now we go to our next forum, which is Right Money plus Open Markets, Prosperity for All. We would like to request everyone to please settle down before we continue the program. Excuse me? Can you please settle down first before we continue the program? Thank you for your cooperation. The support of institutions in conjunction with a market that enables is a potent recipe for unprecedented growth. More so in a region where a vast majority are small and medium enterprises, and a lot of you people are in this genre. Business that need the right environment and the right push to realize their true potential. That is why our final forum for today will focus on this very special and important formula and ingredient. Right money plus open markets equals prosperity for all.
We ask these questions, we remind ourselves that notwithstanding 50 years of amazing progress, some 265 million people within ASEAN, some 44% of the working population of ASEAN are non-banked or without access to basic banking facilities. To lead the discussion here this afternoon, we have an excellent panel. We have Governor Nestor Espinilla, the governor of one of ASEAN's most dynamic economies, the governor of the Central Bank of the Philippines. We have Dato' Seri Nazir Razak, the preeminent banker of his generation, chairman of the CIMB Group. We have Alex Feldman, the CEO of the US ASEAN Business Council. We have Tan Sri Rebecca Fatima, Senior Policy Advisor, Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia. We have three outstanding entrepreneurs, Anthony Thomas, CEO of the FinTech Mint. We have Robbie Antonio, CEO of Revolution Pre-Crafted, the first Philippine startup unicorn. And we have David Foote, founder and CEO of Xenia, which applies artificial intelligence to wellness and well-being. Gentlemen, thank you for taking time to, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for taking time to participate in this crucial discussion. The conversation in ASEAN used to be about integration. Now it is increasingly about inclusion, because the world has come to realize that integration, growth, and dynamism is a hollow promise if not accompanied by inclusion. So my first question to you is, what is the central challenge that ASEAN faces in terms of financial inclusion?
Where is the thing?
Why is it that after 50 years of dramatic progress, we still have 44% of ASEAN's working population without access to basic banking services? Maybe we'll begin with you, Governor, if you could present your views, and then I will moderate a lively discussion by calling on each of you, but not in the order of the sequence. And we will see how this conversation takes us. If there is time, I'd like to also ask for one or two questions from the floor. But Governor, what in your view is the central challenge of ASEAN financial inclusion?
Thank you, Timothy, for the way you framed that issue. I think the main reason why it has taken us so long to tackle the problem of financial inclusion is really the lack of a strong policy framework to address this issue. I think the fundamental problem, the flip side of the issue of financial inclusion, is financial exclusion. I don't think, or the approach was, financial exclusion was a non-problem. In other words, it was treated with apathy. When we started looking at the issue some 2 decades ago, there was very little to take a look at in terms of this space. It was not even a very mainstream topic for a central bank, a financial regulator, to take upon. But it was important to define and to realize that financial exclusion is an issue, especially if you're operating in an economy where large segments of the population are unbanked, and there are many micro, small, and medium enterprises who have no access to credit. You cannot ignore the problem. So for the BSP, we took a very long journey of creating a policy framework that mainstream financial inclusion into the legitimate agenda of a central bank. We looked at financial inclusion as actually forming part of a policy complex that balances many considerations that the central bank worries about: financial stability. You also worry about the integrity of the financial system, that it is not a venue for illegal activities. You also worry about the protection of consumers. So you need to weave this into a policy framework where financial inclusion takes its legitimate position in the overall policy agenda if one is really interested in equitable economic growth. But defining the problem is just, defining it as a legitimate problem is just one part of the issue. Tackling it is also a complex one. So we need to recognize that this is a multifaceted issue that requires a whole-of-government approach and possibly also a lot of collaboration between the public and the private sector. This is especially the case, for example, when we want to create a better environment for micro, small, and medium enterprises. It's not just only about providing access to credit. It's also about increasing the capacity of micro, small, and medium enterprises, making them access markets, developing their own internal abilities. So you need to collaborate with other players in government as well as outside of government. Now we are lucky because we are seeing the entry of digital technology that will make us, that will enable us to solve many of the old problems in an easier way. For example, some of these problems are all about how do you deliver in a cost-effective manner to a market that is very difficult to serve? How do you bridge geography? Philippines is an archipelago of more than 7,100 islands. How do you reach out to people and businesses that spread out over such a geography? How do you overcome infrastructure gaps that are currently existing, gaps in roads, gaps in communication, and also how do you overcome gaps in information? Information is a big problem. Knowing businesses, even the lack of identity is a big issue in the economy. So these are all problems that even a determined player like the BSP as regulator cannot do alone. We need to collaborate and nurture partnerships so that we can solve these problems. At the same time, keep an open mind to innovation, especially digital technology, to enable us to solve problems.
Thank you very much, Governor. So the Governor locates the challenge in the policy framework and in partnerships between the public and private sectors. Dato' Nazir, for many years, you were your generation's, and still now, your generation's preeminent banker. So under your leadership, CIMB Bank has gone from a smallish Malaysian banking enterprise to now one of ASEAN's leading banks. For many years, you championed ASEAN economic integration. But that integration has fallen short when it comes to financial inclusion. Where do you see the central challenge of ASEAN financial inclusion?
Thank you, Tim. First and foremost, I agree we have failed in terms of achieving respectable levels of inclusion. And I agree with the Governor, the policy framework has been a shortcoming. But also as I reflect on building a bank in the past, we have been too focused on our bottom lines. And here I think inclusion must also be seen in the context of the need to change the value system of businesses, banks included. Yeah, I think it's not enough in this new era to think purely about shareholder returns, right? The new era corporation, to me, sure, looks forward with aggression, determination, but must look sideways with love and compassion. That new framework is evolving, and companies must then step up, make their own decisions in terms of what their new value systems are. At CIMB, we announced on Sunday that we now have adopted a policy of contributing 1% of our annual profits to corporate social responsibility. And corporate social responsibility is not about dishing out cash, right? It is also about using resources, i.e. your own staff, as well as your financial resources to help others. It's not about giving fish, it's about providing fishing rods, for instance. So that's one point. Two is, I also agree that technology is now a great enabler for greater financial inclusion. But I think I'd like to look at it in a bigger context, which is that we are in the early stages of the fourth industrial revolution. And the fourth industrial revolution has huge potential for SMEs, huge potential to improve inclusion. The question is whether ASEAN countries and the whole of ASEAN as an organization will step up and optimize the potential of the fourth industrial revolution for inclusion. Yeah. As of today, we've seen, I think Thailand has a plan, Thailand 4.0, Singapore has its plan, Malaysia has its plan. But I think those plans to deal with the fourth industrial revolution are not enough, because increasingly the challenges of the fourth industrial revolution are not, it's about cross-border. It's about enabling movement of data. Data is at the heart of the fourth industrial revolution, but there's so many restrictions in ASEAN today about movement of data, right? How then do we take full advantage of the fourth industrial revolution and technology if we're so restrictive on data? Then we talk about enabling SMEs. Today, when I talk to SMEs, some of them are so excited about, being a small mom-and-pop business, say, selling scarves in Medan, but suddenly discovering the internet and being able to sell throughout Indonesia. But the potential is to sell throughout ASEAN. But yet, there's a lack of clarity as to how they can actually distribute right across ASEAN, the logistics around, right, enabling them to take advantage of the whole ASEAN market. Yeah. So Tim, again, my points are, we've got to do better. Companies have to change their value system. And thirdly, the fourth industrial revolution is going to be beneficial for SMEs and inclusion at large. But ASEAN needs to step forward and make those necessary changes to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nazir. That's making a very profound point, because one of the most difficult things in the world is to change values and the way people look at things. So if the main challenge is a kind of revolution in the way we think, that's making a fundamental point that we need to discuss. I'd like to jump from macro perspectives to 3 micro perspectives. We have in this panel 3 entrepreneurs who are operating in the fourth industrial revolution. We have David Foot, we have Robbie Antonio, and we have Anthony Thomas. I'd like to go to you, David. You are founder and CEO of Xenia, which applies, I believe, artificial intelligence to wellness and well-being. What do you see as the central challenge of ASEAN financial inclusion? Give us a perspective from where you are.
Sure. So I'll give 2 perspectives. One from the aspect of our service providers. We have 250 service providers at Xenia.
David, a bit.
Sorry. We have 250 service providers at Xenia, many of them previously unbanked. We've banked all of them. In fact, we're paying all of them with Bitcoin, and we've created accounts for all of them. But one of the challenges has been the access to banking is limited by the minimum transactional volume. Right? They're not able to open accounts unless they have $100 of income. And generally, that's already a barrier. And what I see the challenge here is banking institutions are not equipped for microtransactions. They're not equipped to bank the unbanked because of the overhead. I believe that technology and startups can help, fintech can help with this. By lowering the barriers, by using technology to make it more efficient, we can bring them onto the platform. But what we've seen is once we brought them onto the platform, literally within 1 to 2 weeks, they're paying bills online, they're remitting money to each other, they understand, they grasp it right away. Right? It's just they have not been introduced, and they are not able to because of the financial barriers. Okay. The other challenge I'll speak of is as a startup, and I believe startups have a big role to play in driving innovation, it's difficult to get funding within this region for early stage. There's a variety of Series A venture capitalists that can invest $3 to $5 million, but in the early stages, it's limited.
David, maybe closer to your...
Closer? Okay. Okay. But in the earlier stages, there's limited funding, and the issue is risk. There's not a lot of institutional capital that's willing to take the risks to fund early stage companies that are able to drive innovation.
So, just to make sure I've got it right, two key points. The banking system is not equipped to handle micro transactions, and access to funding for small enterprises and startups is a challenge.
That's correct.
Correct?
That's
Yes.
correct.
Robbie, you have a very interesting background.
Thank you.
And you have created the first Philippine unicorn startup. Tell us from where you stand, the journey that you have taken what is the central challenge of financial inclusion?
Sure. So I actually grew up in Silicon Valley. I went to Stanford Business School, where there was a plethora of venture capital firms. And so funding was never an issue. So I would go to Sand Hill Road, pitch an idea, and there were a myriad of venture capital firms who would essentially come up with early stage or seed funding for a concept, for a mere concept. There are about 1,000 unicorns, most of which are situated in America for one and one reason: access to funding. It's not like we have fewer brilliant people here in Southeast Asia. We're obviously close to double the population of America, right? There are only 9 unicorns in Southeast Asia, which really brings me to my point. As my co-panelist has said, access to funding in the Philippines is not as ideal or as available as in America or in Europe, shall we say, and developed markets. So I personally, in this journey, had to go abroad. So I went to institutional investors, went to the most prolific seed VC fund in the world, got funding from them because it brings legitimacy. Obviously, I have access to extremely high net worth individuals, but I did not want to go that road. To be a real tech startup, you have to be backed by a real tech VC fund. So that's the road I actually parlayed to myself and achieved in a very short amount of time. So I think we all have our part, especially, of course, the government in terms of funding micro entrepreneurs, which are seated in the back row. And I think that if you do not have access to capital here, go be resourceful and go somewhere else, really. There are other countries, talk about Indonesia, talk about Malaysia, where actually there are more early stage VC funds than the Philippines. So go pitch to them if you can't find access here.
Thank you very much. So your response would be, there are limitations in the environment, but as an entrepreneur, if one meets with those constraints, go somewhere else. And if the idea is strong enough, the funding is there.
If it's not available, you have no other option, right?
Yes.
So go be resourceful and go look where there is actually a preponderance of that.
Anthony Thomas.
Sure. I'd like to come back actually to Governor Espinilla because that's really the context for Mint as well in the Philippines and in the fintech space. And while he suggested that it's the policy framework, I think the BSP actually needs credit for a fairly progressive policy framework. In my mind, the central challenge is around a cost-efficient model, which I think Governor Espinilla talked about as well, a cost-efficient model for banks to really serve MSMEs and individuals below a certain economic threshold. And there are 3 aspects to that. One is banks have traditionally tried to do it with physical presence, but we are geographically spread out countries. Small value transactions that make a huge difference to people's daily lives are seen as expensive to process. And for MSMEs that really fuel the economy, they're seen as high risk because of limited financial information as well as collateral at times. So as a result, in our context in the Philippines, it turns out that 7 out of 10 Filipinos don't have access to a bank account, and even fewer have access to formal credit. I'm not talking about informal lenders at usurious rates, but that results in Filipinos waiting in line for everything, from their salary to a disbursement from the government to transportation to paying for their bills to load their prepaid mobile phones, all of that. And while that's the challenge, as a practitioner, the opportunity is around the mobile phone, in my mind. The fact that it is ubiquitous, that almost every adult in our countries has a mobile phone of some form, gives us this opportunity. Now, Mint started off as the fintech arm of Globe Telecom. So that gives us access to